All right, today we're diving into one of the most critical moments in the American Revolution, the Battles of Saratoga. Now, this wasn't just some random battle. Oh no, this was the campaign that literally changed the course of the entire war. So let's get into how it all went down.
Just look at this scene. This painting really says it all. You have a highly trained, professional British army surrendering in the middle of the American wilderness to a bunch of rebels. So the big question is, how on earth did this happen? How did a global superpower get so completely outmaneuvered and defeated?
Well, to understand the failure, you first have to understand the plan. And believe me, it was a grand one. Back in 1777, the British thought they had cooked up the perfect, war-winning strategy to finally put an end to this American rebellion. The idea was classic military strategy: divide and conquer. They saw New England as the real troublemaker, the heart of the revolution. So the thinking was, if they could just cut it off from the rest of the colonies, the whole thing would just wither and die.
This map here shows you exactly what they had in mind. It was a giant three-pronged attack. Three separate British armies, all coming from different directions, were supposed to meet up in Albany, New York. The goal? To take complete control of the Hudson River Valley and split the colonies in two. So, let's break down this pincer movement. First, you've got General Johnny Burgoyne, and he's leading a huge army south from Canada. Then, General William Howe is supposed to bring his army north from New York City. And finally, a third, smaller force under Barry St. Ledger would march east from Lake Ontario. 3 armies, 1 meeting point. Looked great on paper, right?
Yeah, about that great on paper part. It turns out, in the real world, things got complicated fast. Almost from the get-go, this brilliant, complex plan started to completely unravel.
And here's where it all goes wrong. The other 2 armies? They never showed up. General Howe, for reasons historians still argue about, decided it was more important to go capture Philadelphia. Meanwhile, St. Ledger's army out west got defeated and had to turn back. All of a sudden, General Burgoyne is all by himself, marching deeper and deeper into enemy territory.
And Burgoyne's problems were just getting started. One major issue was the conduct of his Native American allies. The killing of a young woman named Jane McCrea became a massive story. It was basically a propaganda victory for the Americans. It created so much outrage that local farmers and militiamen started pouring out of the woodwork to join the fight against him.
And you can see the effect right here. It was a huge shift in manpower. While Burgoyne was stuck out in the woods, completely cut off from reinforcements, the American army just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The numbers were starting to tip, and not in his favor.
So, let's meet the main players. On the American side, the man in charge of General Horatio Gates. He's a very cautious, by-the-book kind of guy. And facing him is the very ambitious, and now very trapped, British General John Burgoyne. But there was another American general on the scene, and his actions would change everything.
Okay, so even though he's in a really tight spot, Burgoyne decides he has to keep moving forward. On September 19th, his army finally runs into the Americans, and the first major battle kicks off. It's known as the Battle of Freeman's Farm.
Now, inside the American camp, there was a lot of tension, a real clash of styles. Gates, the top commander, wanted to play it safe. He just wanted to sit behind his defenses and wait for the British to attack him. But his second-in-command, the fiery and aggressive Benedict Arnold, had a totally different idea. He wanted to go on the attack and fight the British in the woods, where the American riflemen would have a huge advantage.
Arnold kinda got his wish. He convinced Gates to let him send out Colonel Daniel Morgan's famous riflemen, and they slammed into the British advance guard. The fight that followed in this little clearing at Freeman's Farm was just vicious. It was hours of brutal, back-and-forth combat.
And the Americans fought with a tenacity that absolutely shocked the British. Listen to this quote from a British officer who was there. He said, "The courage and obstinacy with which the Americans fought were the astonishment of everyone." This was a clear message. The rebels weren't just going to run away.
By the end of the day, the British technically won. They held the battlefield, but this was a classic Pyrrhic victory. They took almost 600 casualties, which was double what the Americans lost. And for Burgoyne, alone in the wilderness, those were losses he absolutely could not replace.
So what happened next is just mind-boggling. General Gates writes up his official report of the battle, and he gives 0 credit to Benedict Arnold. Everyone knew Arnold's leadership was the reason the Americans fought so well, but Gates just ignored him. This led to a massive shouting match, and it ended with Gates officially relieving Arnold of his command. The Americans had just sidelined their best battlefield general.
So for the next 2.5 weeks, there's this really tense standoff. Burgoyne is just waiting, hoping for reinforcements that, are never going to come. His food is running out, his army is getting weaker, and finally, on October 7th, he decides he has to do something. He rolls the dice on one last desperate attack.
And this sets up maybe the most dramatic moment of the entire war. Benedict Arnold, officially with no command, is just sitting in his tent fuming when he hears the sounds of another major battle starting. So, what does he do?
He couldn't stand it. He couldn't just sit there. In complete defiance of General Gates's orders, Arnold jumps on his horse, gallops towards the fighting, and rides right into the thick of it, with absolutely no official authority to do so.
And his arrival on the scene was like a shot of adrenaline for the American troops. He rallied them, he led these furious charges, and he personally led the attack that broke the British lines and captured a key defensive position. It was Arnold's unauthorized charge that turned the battle into a massive, decisive American victory.
The Battle of Bemis Heights was a complete catastrophe for the British Army. Their lines were broken, their spirit was shattered. It was over, and the consequences of this defeat were about to ripple across the entire world. Which brings us right back to where we started. A few days later, Burgoyne's army was completely surrounded, outnumbered almost 3-1, with no food and no hope of escape. On October 17th, General John Burgoyne surrendered his entire army.
And this is why Saratoga is called the turning point of the war. It wasn't just a military victory. News of this surrender raced across the Atlantic and convinced France that the Americans could actually win. So France officially joined the war as an American ally. That meant money, supplies, and, most importantly, a navy. This single event changed everything.
But the story has this one last, incredible, tragic twist. Benedict Arnold. The man whose personal courage and leadership were arguably the biggest factor in this world-changing victory, would, just a few years later, betray everything and become America's most famous traitor. It just leaves you thinking, how does the hero of Saratoga become a villain?